you had quite the run at Zoom, and you were there at what many historians would call an inflection point. And so I want to go back to March of 2020. Take me through that moment and the unpredictability, and just what was the atmosphere like?
That was definitely the most interesting and intense period in my career. And I think for us, it actually probably started in February. So Zoom had a
Oh,
massive engineering team over in China. Even then, we'd talk to our counterparts and they'd say, "Hey, I'm going home for Chinese New Year. Have you heard about the lung disease over here that everyone's getting?" And I was like, "No, hadn't heard about it yet." But then all of a sudden it starts to creep into the news cycle, and we're watching our web signups go 3 to 4x per day over the course of 10 days. And at the time, I think we were really excited. We had 10 million daily active users on the platform. We had a few hundred million in revenue. We were stoked about that as a young, growing company. And then all of a sudden, the numbers getting up into 100 million. It went from, I think, 10 to 300 million over less than 30 days. And so we started to see it in our signups data first, and then in our actual kind of credit card accounts and the PLG motion. All of a sudden, we had a 1 million support ticket backlog. It was a shocking time to kind of just take in that many customers at once. But it felt really, we were really motivated by the feeling of just we felt like we were keeping kids in school and the world running in a time when everyone was really scared. And so it was definitely a lot of 20-hour days, but it was a fun time to be all hands on deck.
now did you know in the moment that this wasn't just a temporary spike? Like this was now going to be a fundamentally different business?
No, I think that was the hardest part of it, right? You all of a sudden, you go from a few hundred million in revenue to a few billion revenue run rate over the course of less than a quarter, right?
Wow.
And there's few enterprise software businesses that can scale like that. But we had a big product led growth motion, and our sales productivity 5x. And I think it stayed at 2 to 3x for multiple quarters. There were just so many inbound orders coming in, which is always my great ammo in the debate between CROs and CFOs. What's the constraint? Is it sales capacity or demand? I know a few reps can do a lot when you've got that kind of inbound, but we didn't know if it was going to last forever or not. And we very much considered ourselves an enterprise software company. And we all of a sudden had a 1 billion plus credit card business that we weren't sure if we could plan around that cash continuing to be there, or if we needed to expect it to evaporate pretty quickly if the pandemic only lasted for 2 weeks, if that's what it took to kind of calm down the spread. And so that was definitely the most challenging time in scenario planning I can remember.
Sales capacity planning in that environment just completely bends my brain to think about. And I was listening to this story about the CRO at Wiz, and it was the year I think they went from 100 to 300 million. And by the way, that what Zoom was doing, it's incredible. It's a multiple of that growth. But they were saying, how did you even plan how many sales reps to bring aboard? And he's like, we had no metrics for it at the time because there weren't many companies ever to grow at this pace. I was literally just looking at sales rep calendars and being like, are they at a capacity yet? Who has time for meetings and who doesn't? So it's the heuristics go out the window to a certain extent.
To some extent, I mean, we knew that it was a no regrets move to add humans as fast as we could in those areas of our business, right? Let's say as fast as you can hire might be something like 60, 70% headcount growth, even if you start adding in new recruiters, right? And so it just, as fast as we could go, wasn't as fast as the market demand. And we were really lucky to have a PLG model that we could lean back on, because what we couldn't capture, people could do through credit cards, and we could figure out kind of a more streamlined farm motion from there.
What a saving grace that people can actually put down a credit card and still buy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely, we had more enterprise customers going on credit cards than we thought at the time, because I think there was a lot of just desperation to get something up to keep the businesses moving. But it was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. Okay, so you're scaling like crazy. In the position you're in, what breaks first?
The position for everyone, the thing that broke for everyone first was our support volume. There was a point where we had a 1 million ticket backlog. And I think our CEO and CFO sent a note out and said, we need a few volunteers from every team.
A few.
Go batch tickets. Because, and so I volunteered from the finance team. I was like, sure, I'll go batch tickets for the support team, because we knew that everyone just needed help. So you were helping wherever you could. So that was the first one. The second one was, we were not even thinking about our AWS bills. We had a very efficient DevOps team. They always hit their budget. It was just a very streamlined it's one of the strengths of Zoom, honestly, is like their architectural components there. So we didn't spend a lot of time with the DevOps team forecasting our COGS. And then all of a sudden, I think there's a limit to even AWS auto scaling, and like we hit it, right? All of a sudden we were spending a near like $500 million on AWS. It was all on demand pricing. So figuring out how to get a handle on that. And especially like, how do you structure a multi-year commit to get back on a discount plan when you don't know if all those customers are going to evaporate? So that was definitely the first thing on our side. We were spending all of our time thinking about hosting costs in a way that was totally new for the finance team.
AWS calls you up like, hey, you have a credit card link to this account. Can you update the billing details? I'm sure it wasn't actually that, but you become like an expert in cloud computing costs overnight.
No, we actually hired someone from the AWS team, and they said, yeah, during those 2 quarters, we had a forecast for like actual AWS revenue with and without Zoom. Never in our mind did we imagine that we might be at kind of the top of that, because they also saw us as a huge revenue risk. So like, we have no idea if these people are going to need this a quarter from now, but it's a big part of our revenue now.
That's crazy. People forget that some of those costs don't exactly scale linearly. And cloud computing in general, just being at a business before where a lot of our customers were free and then they would upgrade to the paid version. It's like, you can't just take a revenue number and be like, well, that percentage growth in revenue equals this percentage in cloud costs. Like, it's a multivariable problem that's difficult to understand.
Especially when you've got a big freemium model. Like, we had a lot of principles around Zoom was always free for anyone in education. That all of a sudden became a huge proportion of our business that we were providing for free, because the kids who were in there learning in it 8 hours a day was all of a sudden a massive proportion of our hosting costs.
Yeah.
And then we had a free plan. You can do a lot in less than 40 minutes. And so a lot of people just stayed there. So there definitely was some margin compression, but the business became so profitable so quickly because product-led growth motions can scale like that, right? So quickly with really no other costs other than hosting and payment processing. We didn't really even know what to do with all the cash and whether or not it was prudent to go make long-term investments with it. So it was a very interesting time.
Hey, so sometimes I'm like a dog that sees a car going down the street and you have to run after it. The 40-minute limit for Zoom, I've wanted to ask somebody for so long. Where does that number come from? Because it is highly specific. Like, it's longer than a 30-minute meeting, but it's not long enough to be a 45-minute or hour meeting.
I don't know. That's one of those.
It's like a mystery of life to me.
I think Eric has so much expertise in this particular category. He's got a lot of instincts. I think he's like, 30 is too short, 40 is just enough that you're hooked. And if you're using it in a business context, you'll find it annoying enough. You can't get to an hour that you'll pay the $15 on a credit card to keep going.
It works, but I've always wondered that. All right, thanks. All right, back to our regular scheduled program. From that time at Zoom, is there something that still influences how you lead today?
I have a lot of gratitude for that time period, because I think that finance people can kind of get stuck working in like a particular phase of a company, right? You're either an early stage person doing a lot of thinking about first order problems, or a scaling person kind of keeping all the trains moving at the same time. Or you're a person who works in lower growth environments. You put on your private equity hat and you figure out how to make it a really strong, viable business in that kind of third, slower stage of growth. And I think often we specialize in one. And I kind of got to see all three over the course of 4 years. So it definitely extended the time horizon over how I think about our business in a way that was really valuable for me, having only been in growth companies before that, never really seen hypergrowth, never really seen kind of the contraction on the other side of it. But I think more than anything, it taught me to be more strategic with M&A. I think there was a period where our stock price ratcheted up. We as a business were doing everything we could just to serve the demand we had in our existing category. And I think that the idea of taking on a major acquisition seemed like too much, right? How could we possibly take on more when we're dealing with that much? But there's also kind of finite moments where you have a lot of market power and an opportunity. And I think that we probably could have done more inorganically. And now being in a space where the data space in particular, I think is very fragmented. There are a lot of M&A opportunities. I definitely am more strategic about the build versus buy conversation because of my time there.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, lol. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.